हेलो दोस्तों, आज मैं आपके साथ शेयर करूंगा इवोल्यूशन ऑफ डेमोक्रेटिक डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन के बारे में। तो आइए शुरू करते हैं। इवोल्यूशन ऑफ डेमोक्रेटिक डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन क्या है? आफ्टर द सेकेंड वर्ल्ड वॉर, द न्यूली फॉर्म्ड नेशन स्टेट्स adopted the growth of centered model for development. In this model, the state assured the moral and political responsibilities for the development of the society. It became gradually evident that the growth center model for development aimed only at economic growth and increase the gross domestic product GDP of the country, but it could achieve this at great social and environmental costs. This development model has bypassed large section of the society, leading to a greater disparity, further marginalizing the deprived section. The special program initiated for the vulnerable section failed to make an impact because of the people were treated as mere beneficiaries and objects of development. Worldwide discontent and disillusionment generated by this dominant model for development led to its severe criticism. A crucial debate is on in developing countries regarding the degree of control that central government should exercise over development planning and administration. The past experience of planned development for the last 50 years in India and the result thereof have raised doubt regarding the achievement of the welfare objectives, removal of poverty and social inequalities, economic growth with social justice, etc. There was a disillusionment with the results of highly centralized planning. It resulted in economic inequalities, regional disparities, and increased absolute poverty. Therefore, the basic premises of development theory came into question during the 1970s. The growing realization among policy analysts that as government activities expand, it is increasingly difficult to plan and administer all development activities effectively and efficiently from the center. Hence, local autonomy in making decisions of primary concern to the locality and greater responsibility for designing and implementing development programs became necessity. This revived interest in the notion of decentralization. Participatory development has emerged as an alternative paradigm over the past 2 decades as a result of the criticism of the dominant model for development. Development would mean a process of change from present situation to better one, with deliberative intervention by citizens and institutions. New perspective of development stress that along with economic growth, development of the quality of the life of individuals, families, and community should also be ensured. It can be feasible through greater people participation in decision making, creating opportunities for the productive employment. Access to consumer goods and basic services such as health, sanitation, education, communication, development, and can be sustained if special efforts are made systematically. Involve the deprived section of the society in the process by taking into account their special need. It can reduce inequalities and bridge the ever widening gap between the rich and the poor. Participatory development strategy and also ensure that more people have the access and to control over their resources. An alternative participatory development paradigm, the necessities and creation of pressure from the grassroots which can enable them to participate actively in planning, involve them in execution and monitoring more equitably distribution of resources. People-centered development model make people active in development process. Further, it is now realized that upward shift functions from the district to the states and from the states to the union has not contributed either to the strengthening of the center or to making planning more effective. Indeed, it has had the opposite effect on both counts. The machinery of the government has become excessively and flabby at the center as well as in the states. Planning has become so out of touch with ground level reality that is in danger of losing credibility. This development have made political parties scholars think in terms of reversing the upward trend, which is unambiguously put means decentralizing the functions from the union to the state and from the state to the sub-state levels. In addition, everywhere the leaven of democracy has stated a process towards mass politics. People are beginning to demand say in the running of their own affairs. It is this more than creeping decade of centralized governance that has impelled political parties to turn their attention towards decentralized governance. The major thrust of decentralized governance are bringing administration at the doorstep of the people and establishing direct relationship between the client and administration. The local institutions, the private sector, and the civil society organization all play an important role in decentralized government. Post-independence, India adopted democratic system of governance. Institutions of democracy in India, in fact, began to grow. During the colonial rule, the provisions of the democracy found their place in the Government of India Act of 1909 and 1919 and 1935. Following the deliberation within the Constituent Assembly, democracy was introduced in the post-independence in India in 1950. In India, Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Jayal Prakash Narayan described the democracy as the movement that gives power to the people. Gandhi said, true democracy could not be worked by some persons sitting at the top. It had to be worked from the below by the people of every villages. Democracy at the top could not be success unless it was built from below. In India, the Panchayati Raj institution can set an example for the world for the emulate in the matter of democratic decentralization. On the first point, decentralization, there are broadly three views. The Balwant Rai Mehta report favored the bloc as being nearest of the people 1957. The Sukhmay Chakraborty Economic Advisory Council 1984 report on the decentralization of planning considered even the district to be too small for the proper area of planning. The Ashok Mehta report 1978 on the Panchayati Raj, however, categorically favored the district because historically it had been the pivot of the local administration for the centuries, and also because the requisite expertise for planning and related to purposes could be mastered at this level and not lower. The Dantwala report 1978 on block level planning and Hanumant Rao report 1984 the district planning and endorsed this view. In essence, in political parties, to thinking has centralized on the district as the most appropriate level for the first stage decentralization from the state level. The principal's thrust of Balwant Rai Mehta Committee report was towards decentralization on democratic institution is an effort shift decision centers to close to the people to enable their active and continuous participation under the local popular control. The Ashok Mehta Committee principal thesis was the functional necessity for decentralization of the administration level and closer to the people. Both Balwant Rai Mehta Committee report and Ashok Mehta Committee report can be considered as landmarks in the history of democratic decentralization in India. With the introduction of the 73rd and the 74th Constitution amendments, decentralization has been democratized and the scope of the democracy has expanded to include the women, OBCs, Dalits and the grassroots level. Prior to these dominant social groups exclusively dominated institution of the local self-governments. This defeated the very purpose of democracy. Democracy has to be grounded in the reality of society. This view of democracy can be termed as the substantive democracy. In the past 2 decades in India, substantive democracy has found a significant place in the discourse of democracy.